stand today, in spite of all we've been through in Iraq over the last decade. The former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mike Mullen, said about 2 years ago, he said the #1 national security interest of the United States is not Al-Qaeda, it's not the Taliban, it's our debt. Our debt is consuming us from the standpoint of not allowing us, from a budgetary standpoint, to do what we need to do long term, which is make sure that we train our military in a way that is second to any military in the world, and making sure that those best trained military men and women are equipped with the latest, most technologically advanced weapon systems in the world. And as long as we are having to #1, reduce budgets like we're having to do in the current atmosphere that we operate in, and as we look down the road, things don't look any better, because we are not only not getting our arms around this debt, we continue to add to the debt. And the more you add to the debt, the more interest you're going to have to pay. And you got some bankers in here, Kathy, that know and understand that interest rates have been as low for a sustained period of time, probably for as long as any time in the history of our country. And we all know that's not going to last. And there's a projection now that it won't be long before interest on our debt, the obligations we have for Medicare and Social Security, will consume all of the revenues that come in under today's revenue, under today's revenue standards. And if we don't do something about this debt, and we don't do something about entitlements, then what kind of America are we going to leave to the next generation? So with this as a backdrop, in the summer of 2010, almost 2 years ago now, I'm sitting on the floor one night and I'm visiting with my good friend Mark Warner, who is a newly elected senator from Virginia. He was elected in 2008. And Mark has a lot of Atlanta connections. He started out in the business world here in Atlanta, and became a very wealthy man in the business world. And as I tell him, he made all his money in Atlanta and he took it all to Virginia to spend. And I've never gotten over that. But after he was elected, some of my Atlanta friends and friends of his called up and said, "You ought to get to know this guy. You'll find, I think, you have a lot in common." And so Mark and I did become very good friends, and from time to time we'd talk about different issues. So in the summer of 2010, we are sitting there looking at a $14 trillion debt that this country owes. And as we looked around the Senate chamber, we realized that there is nobody, not one single member of the Senate, is focused on what we're going to do long term about trying to retire this debt. Everybody at that time was focused on the election of 2010. That was some 4 or 5 months down the road, and that's appropriate. I mean, that's what politics is all about. But the fact that everybody was focused on the election means that the issue relative to the debt, which, as Admiral Mullen said, is our #1 national security interest, was being totally ignored. So Mark and I decided that between the two of us, we ought to start educating our colleagues about, #1, the seriousness of this situation regarding the debt, and what will be the impact if we do nothing on our country long term. So we began putting a group together, and it was totally bipartisan. Every time we'd add a Republican, we'd add a Democrat, and our group grew from 2 to 6 to 20 folks who would meet on a somewhat an irregular basis, but Mark and I would bring in individuals. We brought in economists from around the country. We brought in bankers from the Federal Reserve and other places to explain to members of the